Am I done?
It's a pretty good turnout. Dan, we can't hear you.
Can you hear me now? It is a good turnout. Everybody wanted to weigh in on the lack of a holiday party, so I think that must be it.
I was really bummed.
I was too. I was looking forward to it. It's kind of a nice tradition.
Maybe next year.
Not for me.
I don't know. I think we should invite people who couldn't come last year.
Oh,
You
that's
know,
a nice thought.
that might be a nice thing to do.
Or the year before.
Or the year before, that's right. Hopefully hopefully we'll be able to do it next year.
Yeah. Well, any chance they'll change their mind because this Omicron variant is proving to be a bust from what I've been reading.
I don't know. I think it has to do with, you know, the indoor mask mandate. It's not my decision.
Right.
We're not going to blame you, Nora.
Yeah. Thank you. But I mean, I don't know. It's above my
Okay.
pay grade.
So do you guys want to get started?
Let's do it.
Okay, so do we want to, Jeff, thank you for joining us. We have lots of questions about how your operation works, just because most of us don't know very much about it. But do we want to approve the minutes first or do that at the end? Let's get it out of the way. So did everyone have a chance to read the minutes? Okay, so these are the November minutes. So can I have to ask somebody, would someone please volunteer to take minutes? I'm not doing minutes for my last, well, let's make Cindy do it. She just came on.
Randy, they record this, right?
Yes,
Okay, so if I'll watch the playback and do type up minutes based on the playback. I'm not going to take them while we're going. It's easier for me to kind of watch it back and then type up the minutes that way. So I'll do them.
thank you. So for the November minutes, can I have a motion to approve them? Okay, so Kristen made a motion to approve them, and second is Heather. So all those in favor? Okay, the minutes are approved. So Jeff, would you, the floor is yours.
Hi, thank you for having me. If you guys have any questions, feel free to ask. I don't know how much you know about the harbor and the actual marina, but our season runs from May 1st to November 1st. And then we just started this year doing winter storage for kayaks. So this year we had 13 kayaks for winter storage. And we're in the process of building docks for the east and west basins. That's about it.
How many people do you employ?
I have-
Season on and off season?
I have 3 people, myself, Kristen, my office manager, and also 1 laborer.
And what kind of things do they do during the season and then the off season?
So with the dock rebuild, myself and the laborer are building the docks kind of all winter and all summer. And Kristen maintains the office, and she's starting now to do the renewals for 2022. All those applications have to go out right after the new year. So she's in the process now of printing all that stuff up and stuffing the envelopes and getting everything ready to go out.
Jeff, how many slips do we have on the docks, and how many moorings are you responsible for these days?
So the moorings are about 170, plus we have about 30 in Larchmont Harbor, which is actually, a portion of Larchmont Harbor is the village of Mamaroneck.
Right.
We're also responsible for those. And slips for kayaks and boats, around 400.
Wow. And how's that compare to like Rye and New Rochelle? Are we bigger or about the same size, or?
Well, New Rochelle takes bigger boats. They have bigger slips.
Oh, yeah.
Our marina is only up to 22 foot on the dock, except for one dock. S dock is the only dock that we can put larger boats up to 25 feet on.
Right.
So, but New Rochelle's a bigger marina. Rye is also a bigger marina, again, with bigger boats.
Right. There are also a lot tighter marina up there. Have we ever thought about making ours tighter, or?
It's a water issue, and where the channel is trying to, you can't encroach on the channel.
Oh, right.
So like in Rye, they only have fairways, so those, the Coast Guard doesn't monitor like they do the actual channels.
Right.
I have to be careful on what I do, as far as getting too close to the channel.
And what's the breakdown between resident and non-resident, especially in the slips on the dock?
Hold on a second.
About half or more, or?
Right around half. It's a little bit less than half now. I think it was like 51% resident and 49% non-resident. Right around that.
And the non-residents, do you have a sense of whether they live like in unincorporated, the town of Mamaroneck, or are they right nearby?
The mix. It's between the town of Mamaroneck, the village, Larchmont, New Rochelle. We do get a lot from like upstate New York, like Brewster area, that area up
Oh,
there.
really?
Yeah.
And people migrating from the Bronx too. I know I keep a boat at the end of the A dock, and that more and more Bronx neighbors. They're great. I'm glad they pay what they pay to dock there. But
Yeah.
so are there empty space these days? I mean, there seem to be empty slips. I'm just wondering if people are still paying for not using.
The inside where I can only put smaller boats. So
Right.
nobody really buys like a 14 or 15 foot boat anymore. Everything is, even 22 boats are starting to get less and less. Out of the slips, for example, A dock, we had 43 vacant. And then D dock, we had 37. But most of those are all on the inside, where I can't put a 21 or 22 foot boat, because they're at low tide, they wouldn't have enough water to get out at low tide.
Right. So you only have like the small whalers are in there, like 17, 18 footers.
Or dinghies to get back and forth to the moorings and that kind of stuff. That's why I've kind of increased the in-water kayak, and I've been renting those to in-water kayak,
Oh, interesting. And how does that 43 and 30, that's a lot of dock space, obviously, 80 boats. So,
I mean, each slip is roughly 9 feet long, is the width of the boat. We make the slips 9 feet when we're building the docks.
But when we, so those 80 empty spaces this past year, how's that compare to prior years? Is that high or low or?
It's going down. It was more.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah.
Interesting. Because with COVID last year, it seemed to me, at least on my end of the dock, there was a lot more than I had seen before, but.
Yeah, a lot of
including
people
boaters.
bought boats. A lot of people went out and bought boats with COVID. So
Right. And for those of you that haven't been on our docks, they're great, and the new docks look great, by the way.
Yeah. We're starting to build a dock now. That's the
Yeah,
one.
it's really nice. I mean, we have water now. That was something I guess Joe had put in a couple of years ago, right? And now, any talk about adding electric?
There is. I mean, the way I'm building the docks, it can be added in the future. All the hangars are built inside the dock, and the water lines on the new docks are all inside the dock underneath, so they're not laying up on top of the dock.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
So all the hangars are all built into the dock, so if we ever wanted to add it, we could.
And how much would that cost? Is that a major capital project, or would it be
That's
relatively?
a capital project, yeah, because I don't know exactly where they would have to run the power from
Right.
to supply the dock. That once I get the docks built and in place, that's my next project, is to look into that.
And how
Right
much more do you think we could charge?
I'm sorry, what was that?
Sorry, I interrupted you. You were saying there.
Yeah, just right now, my main concern is to get the docks safe, so they're not, falling apart every time there's a storm. I don't have to keep going down there and doing repairs and everything.
Yeah.
So that's the concern right now. Then we'll look into the electric.
What kind of premium do you think you'll be able to get if we were able to add electric?
I mean, if we put it on every slip, you could probably increase the slip, rate. Again, 22-foot boats don't require a lot of power.
Right.
Not like we're putting 40-foot boats where the people want shore power, where they're going to be running air condition and that kind of stuff. So it's, we could probably, 20%, I would say 15% increase if we
Mhm.
put power on the box.
Yeah, I see more and more people putting just solar panels are getting so cheap.
With the little boats, that's what they're doing. They're just putting, the solar panels are getting so efficient now. That's what they're doing.
Yeah.
So.
Interesting.
So I had a question, Jeff. At our last meeting, we had asked about the fees, and I paddleboard, so I get a permit, so we can park and launch and everything. But for people that don't have a permit, there was an incident over the summer where I was with a friend. She didn't have a permit, so she parked to use the ramp for the paddleboard. The sign on the fence said $10 for kayaks. Doesn't even mention paddleboards, but we know that that's intertwined. But then when she went to pay, it was $20 at the booth. And she was told that the rates went up. And I just wanted to ask about that, because I kind of feel like $20 for someone to just walk down the ramp and throw a paddleboard in the water was kind of a lot when it was $10. And, she's like, I'm not going to come back here to do that. And it drives people over to Bleecker to park and launch free from there. So I was just curious about those fees.
Bleecker Avenue is now shut down from what I know of, because that turns out that is somebody's property, as far as I know. So you can't launch off that beach anymore. As far as I know. All the
I know
rates,
people did it all summer. I know that.
Yeah.
So I'm sure they're probably going to start enforcing that. I did hear that was an issue, but I was really more concerned with the $20, with that being like a big jump in price to go from 10 to 20, particularly for like a paddle boarder. I felt like it was a lot.
fees.
Did that include the parking by any chance? Because I know that.
Yeah, no, so that's why it doesn't, so it's a combined fee. So if it's $12, it was $12 to park the year prior, and it was $10 to launch a
Right.
kayak and park. It didn't make any sense. So it was $12 to park alone, and then another $8 actually to launch your paddleboard if you do the math. So I think that's where the logic came with that fee.
So now it's just $20 to park and launch. They're both in one fee.
It's one enclosed fee.
Right.
Yeah, I guess, I don't know. I guess I still feel like it's a lot for a paddleboard, but that's just me.
Yeah, I
It's
agree.
a
I
lot,
think
it's a lot for a
that's a
one-time
lot.
fee, I think. But again, I get a permit, and I get a permit for that reason. maybe it's not cost effective for everybody to get a permit. Like I try to get out there every week when I have the permit with the paddleboard, but for people who are just kind of coming and, you know, who can't get out there as often, I do feel like it's a little steep for a paddleboard.
Right, but
Again, that's
people,
just my opinion.
but people pay $12 just to park and go to the playground in the summer.
So 10, 12 is
So
not
you,
20.
right, so you get 12, playground doesn't cost anything, the boat ramp does. So to me, it's $12, you're paying it anyway, and then it's $8 to launch your stand-up paddleboard or kayak, which is pretty inexpensive.
Okay, I
What
guess
is,
we'll have to agree to disagree on that. I think it's a lot of money to just walk down the ramp with a paddleboard in your hand and drop it in the water. Again, that's my opinion.
Another option would be is this year, when I built the new kayak docks, I made paddleboard spots. So we could actually store
Oh,
paddle
wow.
on a dock. So that might be another way to go, you know, if you're interested in that.
That's awesome.
It's there. And then when you if you rent that spot, you get a parking pass. You know, one parking pass is included.
That's great news. That's great to hear.
So.
Just talk
Thank you.
for a few minutes about the location and the quantity of both, I guess, kayak racks as well as potentially this new paddleboard rack location.
So that's good. The new paddleboard and kayak rack is going to be next year. We finished it kind of late this season in like August, by the time I got all the materials in to build it. So that went in the water in like August. So we just kept it over in the West Basin for this year. Next year it will be in the East Basin on the inside of D-Dock. And then the other kayak docks that we built are in the West Basin, right alongside the other kayak docks that were there. We just extended it, another dock.
So my question is, we've had a kayak rack for, I don't know, 3 or 4 years in the old location. Actually, we moved to one of the new racks this year after the new ones were built, which was great. Will existing, you know, permit holders get to choose whether they want to be on the East or West Basin, and will there be a difference in price?
No, the price is all the same. And I mean, if somebody that's on a rack now wanted to move, I have limited space because we just went off the waiting list. The new docks were built and filled the dock, you know, and filled them. So there are still a couple, because a couple people didn't get back to us, that we couldn't, you know, move some people around if they wanted to be on the East Basin side instead of the West Basin. You know.
So we should call over to the office if that's something that we're interested in.
Go over to the office and let Kristen know that if you want to be moved, and then, you know, she can move people around.
Great. Thank you.
is there ever, have we looked into like, I know we used to have a woman who had a stand-up paddleboard rental and kayak rental. Are we any talk of reviving either the village doing something like that or bringing in another contractor?
I think if we were to do that, it would be to bring in another contractor, just because of the insurance costs are astronomical for that. So I don't think the village, it's a good idea for the village to take that on. That should be an outside source that does that.
Right. And if we did it, it would still be in the same location over by where
It would be over in the same location, yeah.
Castrella is.
There, I believe that's not being used, as far as I know. I don't think that shed's being used. That's there for that.
Right. So I'm curious, you know, what the alternatives for launching kayaks and paddleboards up and down our side of the sound, like I assume Glen Island, did they open again this past summer or did they?
Glen Island opened, yes. They opened in, for July 4th weekend, they opened.
Okay. And then, so other launch options in the area, how do we compare? Because I kind of agree with Carrie. $20 seems like a lot to me, but I don't know how that compares with.
The only other place is Rye, that's in the immediate area.
Okay.
Rye and Glen Island, those are the only two ramps.
And they charge about the same or?
We're actually cheaper than everybody else.
Right. I noticed we had.
There's like no water in Rye anymore at low tide. They're trying to get that dredged and they can't.
Yeah.
And we're actually getting some boaters from Rye because they can only use their boat half the time because they can't get out of the harbor at low tide.
You're right. That channel is, when was the last time they dredged that out of there?
They dredged it a few years ago, but they didn't, something happened. And I don't know if it was from storms or what the case, because they also have a little river, Rye Brook, you know, runs through and lets out there too. I don't know if that silted it in or what happened, but
right.
they, they got silted in pretty fast there. I'd say within the last 10 years.
I get it's good news. I don't know if we can do any marketing over there for anybody with 22 feet or less. I guess they come see us. I don't know if you're aware. I guess somebody arranged a concert. This is kind of, I thought this was really interesting. I'm not sure if I shared this with the rest of the rec committee, but somebody arranged to get some basically barges, flat. I don't remember what kind of boats, but they arranged like a big dock that they floated out in the middle of the entrance to the harbor. This big shallow.
I heard about it. Yeah.
And they brought in gasoline generators and, you know, set up a band and boats came around and it seemed kind of fun. I mean, it might be an interesting, fun thing to do in the West Basin. We would have space to do that. And, you know, we also have like a natural amphitheater by the Post Road in the West Basin there as well. That's something you might want to think about it. It's a little bit crowded and there seem to be some bigger boats moored in the West Basin than we've had in the past, including that massive catamaran. But
Yeah, I heard that that was a good time when they did that there.
Yeah.
So yeah, we can look into that.
my sense is so I've lived here 14 years. I've only had a boat for 9 or 10 years. And I think about the time I didn't have a boat as like wasted opportunity because we're in this waterfront community and so many of our residents don't really take advantage of it, which is why I was wondering about the rentals and that kind of thing. Because, you know, for the people that don't want to make the commitment, get a boat, you know, call Kristen in January to get your dock space and everything else. Like it's an investment, you got to be committed. But if we offered some sort of options that more people could do it on a casual basis, whether by renting or, you know, chartering or whatever, you know, we could do. But I understand the insurance issue, I guess, is pretty massive on it.
Yeah,
Just to bring people down to the waterfront more.
get them down to the water. I mean, we were going to try and do a thing where if somebody had a friend that wanted to kayak, to maybe just have a couple that they could, you know, more or less, you know, like a loaner type thing, just to get, you know, some people's friends out, you know, and I was waiting to hear back from the insurance how that would work.
I mean, as a practical, that kind of happens informally anyway. I mean, on my street, at least, everybody knows who has a kayak and they can come grab my paddles in my backyard. And likewise, if I have a friend, if you could do a system like that, I'd be happy to let other people use my kayak and
Right.
utilize anyway.
Another option. I didn't hear back. I went to the insurance company back in September with that, and I haven't heard anything back about that. So,
Have you seen any like community programs where they've done that successfully? And
I haven't, no.
the good news about kayaks is they're virtually indestructible. So that's right.
They are.
Like whoever wants to use is welcome to use mine anytime. So that's a great idea.
Jeff, what are your plans for the future besides doing the docks over? Is there anything else that would be on your wish list?
I mean, yeah, I mean, there's a lot of stuff. There's, you know, updating, you know, the locker rooms, you know, the water supply to all the docks needs to be done. We had a couple of major leaks along the seawall.
What does that mean?
The water that carries, you know, from the harbor master buildings where the water starts, and to get it out to the docks, there's pipes underground. So those pipes all need to be upgraded. And the next biggest thing is the seawall in the West Basin. That's all crumbling and falling apart. That's should be a priority. That's got to get done soon.
Is that on is that on the capital list?
It is, and we're going back and forth with DEC because of the way they want it built. They necessarily don't want a wall there anymore. They want just riprap. So that's, for our purposes, that wouldn't work. So
I can say that I was on the budget committee years ago. It's been in the capital budget for a long, long time, if I remember correctly. And Manny, correct me if I'm wrong, but I remember a presentation we saw, gosh, be 8 or 9 years ago on exactly that. I can't see how we could have these massive boulders riprap without a massive liability issue.
right, that's what DEC wants. They're fighting tooth and nail with that.
I mean, it's basically in a really kind of crowded location, heavily used.
Right.
Park is even more heavily used than ever on the West Basin that I've seen.
And
Jeff, who's responsible for that wall? Is it the county or the village?
now the villages, that's the village's wall.
Really?
The
Wow.
county is responsible for the pier, out at the end by the,
Yeah.
that alongside the beach. So that
And
pier out there,
There's
that's,
plans to redo that, right?
there are, yep. It went out for bid.
Okay.
So waiting to see what happens with that.
That'll be amazing.
So but that's the only section that's the counties is that out there. All the rest of the villages.
So we're on the hook for both seawalls on the east and the west bases.
Yes, I got a pretty large, I got 140 feet done of the seawall last year covered under one of the storms. Because after the storm, it started to fall apart. So we ended up getting that done under the one of the FEMA grants.
Just out of curiosity, what did that cost per foot or for the whole project?
For that was, I think, 107,000, and that was 145 feet. Of wall.
Oof.
But that section in the West Basin, it's subsiding, isn't it? The footing's gone, or what's going on with that?
And there's an issue there because the buildings are right behind it. There's the building that has the locker rooms in the Marine unit and the Coast Guard. So that's.
Oh, that part you're talking about. I'm thinking about the other side, closer to like Getz baseball field. That whole area is subsiding.
Yeah, well, yeah, that's the other side is much worse. If you go over by like behind the Marine unit, if you
Yeah.
look there, it's bad. It shifted a lot in Ida. It moved more.
Wow.
Yeah. There is. So is there any plans? I mean, in the past, we thought about making like a walking path along the harbor, through the seawall. Is there any plans as we repair or replace these walls to put that in place?
It can be, yeah. Once DEC lets us know what we can and can't do, then we can start to have those discussions on what we can do as far as the path. If they want riprap, it's going to be hard to do that because that's going to be a gentle slope all the way up. So it's going to make it harder to do that.
Are there any other harbors that have riprap like that are as populous as ours? Or
Dan, they're building, if you guys Google Gansevoort Peninsula, it's on the west side in New York City. They're building this park now. It's going to have riprap.
and are they going to have barriers to keep people from going there? Because it's going to.
I don't know. I'm only looking at pictures online because that's the only newer park in our area that's like a big project that's waterfront that I could find. It's only drawings, but it's riprap.
And when they do the county project at the end, where at the county pier by the beach, that's going to have riprap all around that.
That's where the steel walls are.
Yeah, that's what they're doing, where the stone ends and the steel starts. That's the section that the county's doing. That's what the county has.
So Jeff, have you seen the plans for that?
I have not. I have not.
Are we doing anything different? Do you know if they're doing anything different, like a little gazebo kind of thing, so people can sit there and just look out? Or
I know they're doing a path with lights and benches. I don't know if there's a gazebo.
it'd be a really nice thing just to copy something like Manor Park has or something like that.
Right, with the gazebos on the end, it would be, yeah.
Yeah.
I'll see if I can get get the. I don't.
At the end of the county path, it's gonna be all like a eco paver. So the path's gonna end, and then the very tip of it's gonna be like a economical paver kind of boardwalk kind of thing. That's what they have planned for the end of that pier.
But I think it would be nice. It's a wasted opportunity right now that they're implementing this project. I think it would be really nice to take it to the next level and build something really good. Since we're doing this, is there anyone that we can speak with, or is it a done deal, or what?
Well, that project the county's doing.
No, I understand that, but is there someone that we could speak with? So maybe they, I've been involved with county projects a few times, and they're open to ideas. Sometimes they just want to do the fastest and the easiest way.
Right. I mean, I'll reach out to Dan tomorrow and ask him.
But, it could be a wasted opportunity if they don't do it's a nice thing for senior citizens to just sit out there and look at the water or,
Yeah. Yeah.
I would think anyway.
I'll give Dan a call tomorrow and ask him.
Awesome. Thank you.
Anybody else? Well, thank you so much, Jeff, because we just wanted to find out more about what you do.
You're welcome. Anytime anybody has any questions, just feel free to give me a call.
Okay, terrific. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Take care.
Thanks,
Good night,
Jeff.
everybody.
Good night.
I have something I just wanted to mention because we talked about it. So it's come to my attention that the sport time contract has been re-signed for 2 years. And I think this is a positive thing because in the last fiscal year, sport time, it looks like they're going to be contributing about $275,000 to the village